Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining for the first time, we appreciate your time as always. Make no mistake, the continent of Africa is tired of military bases which do not bring it the benefits, investment and development that it needs. Make no error as well, Africa has some security challenges. However, it is important to know that economic advancement, collaboration, partnership, huge investment in infrastructure, road, bridges, waterway, you name it. This is what the continent of Africa needs at the time. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because the countries across the region are paying attention on their important issues that they should be looking at. They are listening to their nationals to an extent, and African governments that do not listen to their own national interests or do not put their own individual interests on the forefront of their policy will face a number of pressure and challenges. Make no mistake, the countries across the region have come to the point where they have realized that the United States of America is of no significant a partner that can provide them the cover that they need. Other fringe powers across the European Union do not play their own interest. Europe has its own difficulties and challenges that it's going through at the moment. Other geopolitical partner, Russia, is bogged down with the Russian-Ukrainian war. We've also seen what's happening between Israel and Iran at the moment. And more importantly, Russian troops and also collaboration across the Sahel is paying some fruit in those areas. China have said, I will be engaging Africa economically, irrespective of what you think. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because the African Cencom, known as the African Command, which has been in the countries across the continent of Africa in terms of what they call collaboration, partnership. We've seen the United States of America military bases across the continent of Africa, which haven't served well. That has caused coups, supported other removal of leaders across the continent of Africa. This hasn't gone well across the region. It is important to know that the implication of AFRICOM in the continent of Africa hasn't shown tremendous success as we've seen. Recently, we saw the United States of America's general, head of the Cencom, Mr. Michael Langely, misspoke and embarrassed himself in the United States of America Senate talking about the country of Burkina Faso, and more importantly, he doubled down in the country of Kenya. AFRICOM, to an extent, according to experts, it hasn't delivered what African countries were expecting, because based on perspective and analysis report, it has also contributed in making sure that it destabilizes the continent in a number of areas. As you all know what happened in Libya, the role of the United States of America in the continent of Africa has come under question. African nations are looking to where they have to hang on to true partners that can support them. These are amazing times across the region. Experts question why Africans should be in the continent of Africa. Some areas say that they are looking for their own interests, but more importantly, at this time, African experts are beginning to ask why Cencom is the continent of Africa. It has not delivered the goods that it was expected. Thanks to Newzroom Afrika, let's play this clip.
Now, Prof, also considering when you're looking at, places that do have conflict on the African continent as well, there've also been footprint of US military, as they do have, bases, as you've mentioned, across the world, with multiple of them. But looking at their role in Somalia and the operations there as well, when they started with AFRICOM, the whole thing was that we're going to keep Africa safe, we're going to keep conflict out. But they've been there in that part of the world for 23 years, and it hasn't yielded the peace that was put out as the objective.
No, absolutely. It's not always in the interest. The truth is that it hasn't helped that we have foreign troops within our countries on the continent. We also know, for example, that it's through the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, with serious backing of the United States, that they invaded Libya and overthrew Muammar Gaddafi and killed him. And we see the state of that country today. Modern slavery, complete chaos, breeding ground for extremists and so forth. And this goes on and on. We know, for example, closer to home, the Americans are working with various groups also in Mozambique to try and stem the extremist elements within Mozambique, Cabo Delgado and so forth. And so they're all over the place, so serving their own interests, of course. And it's always about their imperial ambitions, whether it is about oil, whether it is about critical minerals, whether it is about gas. These are the interests that the US military has come to protect worldwide.
It is understandable that these international partners like the United States of America, European Union, Russia, China, and other geopolitical partners, Turkey, who are involved in the continent of Africa, do have their investment and also infrastructural contribution in a whole lot of ways. Of course, they should work alongside other partners in the continent of Africa to make sure that the continent of Africa continue to realize its own potential security-wise. However, it's also vitally important to know that these nations have overtaken the continent of Africa, and African countries have come to the point where we can work hand in hand. However, we want to take absolute control over our own security, and we want to be on the front line. How best is this going to work? Because if African officials, military experts are not on the front line themselves, taking a full lead in terms of defining their own future, what will happen if these partners leave? Let's play this clip.
Van den Heerden, who's an international relations expert at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I guess if we could start with taking it back a little as to when the United States started playing a more active role in taking interest beyond its own borders.
Yeah, look, I mean, the truth is that even before World War II, because usually the history starts with an American involvement in World War II after Pearl Harbor and the Japanese attack and so forth. But the truth is that even before that, we know that history shows us that the United States did play a role in various parts in the world. They sent their armada and their fleets to North Africa and other places way before we got to World War II. So they've always been active. They've always played a role, of course, informed by imperialism, informed by the fact that they want to remain the global hegemon and the superpower. And, you know, with this celebration of 250 years, I think it is safe to say that when people think of the United States of America military, you're looking at death and destruction for the better part of those 250 years.
Yeah, and also just taking a look at those statements made about greater ownership, Africa taking greater ownership over its own security as well. Considering that the US has been behind multiple coups on the African continent, what does that tell us?
No, absolutely. I mean, it's all good and well to talk the talk of taking greater responsibility for your own security, but this is a country that has more than 800 military bases in the world. All over the world, including in Africa, in Djibouti, agreements with Botswana and other places, AFRICOM, as you've mentioned, and so forth. So it is in the interest, even though they say countries like Europe, countries like Africa and elsewhere must take more control of their own security, but they actually want to be here. They have to be here. And this is the part they don't want to talk about, because they must ensure that their interests are safeguarded. They talk of critical minerals and many other things on the African continent. They have vested interests, and so they want to be here. So it's all good and well to say that we must take greater responsibility, and indeed we should. But the truth is they want to be here and they have to be here.
Countries like the United States of America at the moment has incredible budgets in terms of their own particular military. Experts put it to be over 500 billion US dollars, but more importantly, the United States of America and to an extent has also seen Africa as a battleground in a whole lot of areas, not just in Djibouti. Recently, the United States of America's officials talking with the country of Ivory Coast if they could relocate their military bases or build some kind of bases around that country. Make no mistake, the United States of America was kicked out from the country of Niger, and more importantly, dismantling the over 100 million drone base that was in the city of Agadez, a country that have hundreds of military bases around the world. Still see Africa as a region where its interest is also threatening a number of areas. However, this particular concern has been raising eyebrows across the region. That's why experts continue to explain the reason why they can't be in the continent of Africa, but it should be the African officials or African militaries that must take full lead in their own country. Let's play this clip.
And their military budget is quite large indeed. They spend more on their military than any other department as well, sitting at $598 billion, 54% of their spending as well. They clearly have a foot in many countries with those 800 bases in some of those 80 countries too. But taking a look at what's going on with Israel, Palestine, and now Israel particularly, and Iran, and the Americans' role in that, let's talk a little bit about their role when it comes to Israel and what we're seeing happening in Iran.
I mean, the reality is that, of course, even though there are the 800 bases globally, it is always good. It makes good business sense to have strategic allies, to have strategic partners that's also all over the world. Post-World War II, we know, for example, that Japan and Australia are strategic allies of the United States in that part of the world, keeping China in check, supposedly. We know, for example, Israel is the strategic partner in the Middle East. A lot of those bases that we are talking about are situated in Muslim countries in the Middle East, ranging from Qatar to Saudi Arabia, all over UAE, etc. And of course, the relationship they have with Israel is a strong one. They support Israel unequivocally, unlimited support militarily and financially. And so this is why currently, and correctly so, the world is saying that the United States is complicit with Israel in the genocide that's happening in Gaza, as it is also now complicit with the state of Israel in the unprovoked attacks on Iran and its energy facilities and nuclear facilities. And it is complicit when Israel attacks countries like south of Lebanon, Syria, and so on. So the bond is very strong. The military and intelligence links are very strong. You are practically talking of one country when it comes to how strong the relationship is between the United States and Israel. And of course, this is not good news. We know, for example, that they're also using proxies. Israel is a proxy for the United States in the Middle East, the same way that Ukraine is a proxy in the war with Russia, and in the same way that Taiwan is being prepared to be the proxy with the future war with China, and I might add, in the near future.
Africa need investment, not military bases that to an extent do not provide them the cover that they need. A better economic and prosperity environment will benefit the continent of African nationals and citizens, and the relationship could work better. Make no mistake, countries across the Sahel are facing some incredible challenges at the moment, but again, it's important to know that I subscribe to the aspect where African leaders, African officials, African military experts should take absolute control of their own security and start engaging those challenges that they are facing, instead of absolutely foreign militaries taking full control. Of course, they can work in partnership. They can collaborate in a number of areas, technology, making sure that they can provide infrastructure, reconnaissance in several ways. But the aspect of the foreign military officials or leaders talking down to the continent of African-owned nationals, making decisions, telling them on how to use their resources, I think that's condescending from the international perspective and from Africa's own perspective.
It's scary indeed. And would you have a proxy example on the African continent?
Not so much a proxy, but as you know, because of the poor state of African governments, they are easily manipulated, they are easily bought. We saw, for example, how quickly, when the Americans came in, they are able to broker a deal between the DRC and Rwanda. When it serves their interests, they can indeed insist that peace must happen. So, of course, they have a very strong alliance with Egypt, and that goes back decades. They give Egypt a lot of military support, a lot of financial support. So one could say that Egypt is their strategic ally when it comes to Africa.
And just playing devil's advocate here, should they then retract all this military support from the African continent indeed? Should AFRICOM not exist anymore? Because it was supposed to bring about peace. Does that mean that everything will then run into a state of chaos? And I'm being a little facetious there. But basically, my question is, will it then minimize the military conflict that we're seeing?
Well, firstly, in terms of your hypothetical scenario, I don't think the US will ever leave Africa because their interests are just too much in terms of oil, in terms of critical minerals. The continent is simply too rich. And the other wealth that the continent, in the next decade to 2 to 3 decades, the other wealth is going to be human resources. We are a young continent. Europe, America, and other places are becoming old. They are going to want to export the young people from Africa. But that's another issue. If they should withdraw, I don't think it will leave Africa in a very bad way, because those same interests are also what is keeping Russia and China and other countries on the continent. I think they will just fill the gap. They will be able to step up. And that's why it's important that the African Union and South Africa, in terms of BRICS, begin to also entertain the idea of security pacts, security agreements, and so on and so forth, because we see how uncertain the world is becoming.
Yeah, Prof, always so good to pick your brain. Thank you so much for your time.
So AFRICOM's presence in the continent of Africa has come to be questioned in a number of areas because the United States of America's history and behavior towards African governments and leaders, and more importantly, the history hasn't sit well with regards to the United States of America's military presence in the continent of Africa. We've seen what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. The U.S. is a staunch ally of the country of Israel, and more importantly, the country of Iran was talking about engaging the United States of America in terms of talks. And at the moment, we've seen Israel engage Iran, and Iran is responding back. Where does the United States of America stand? It's sitting on the fence. The United States of America leader, Mr. Donald Trump, has come out and texting and also go to the Truth Social and saying some things very dodgy in terms of international diplomacy. Make no mistake, there is just no leadership in the global community at the moment. Every African nation should stand up to itself and face the difficulties that they are facing at this moment. The United States is not a strategic partner as it used to be. It has abandoned some of its allies in Europe, Asia, and the continent of Africa, more importantly. So experts talking about this, they have the reason why they are very concerned why AFRICOM should not play the role it thought it was playing. It should allow African governments and also military officials take absolute control of their own security. Africa is at a crossroad at the moment. The international partners have also realized that they too have difficulties and challenges. The United States is going through incredible pressure at the moment, considering what's happening between Israel and Iran, and the United States have international concerns with the country of China, and also it promised once that it was going to solve the war in Ukraine and Russia. How is that playing out so far? We've seen a number of international concerns and African governments asking this question because they have come to the realization that the United States and other international partners cannot deliver the security that they need. It is about time these nations take absolute control of their own particular security and move their countries swiftly and engage those nations or those particular threats that they face. I want to thank you for watching. I will be looking forward to meeting you soon in our next episode. Smash the like button and share the video, and have a good day. Bye-bye.